Hello, I'm Professor William Watkin, and I'm taking time away from my metrosexual pursuits such as brewing my own craft beer and making my own goat's cheese to talk to you about something which on the surface, for me at least, seems highly unlikely because first of all it involves Gary Lineker and second of all it involves something that I saw on the front page of The Sun. But no matter, I'll move forward all the same. So you probably realise that Gary Lineker has been caught in a Twitter storm of late because of his comments on what he perceives as the racism in the British press as regards the treatment of child refugees that have been given permission to enter this country from the jungle in Calais. It transpires that a number of these refugees, having had their photographs taken by the press, have been outed as not being children at all, and it's suggested in actual fact that many of these refugees are playing the system by pretending to be children when in actual fact they're grown adults just so that they can gain entrance into the UK. Lineker thinks that this represents a profound racism in the British press and also social media, and I for one agree with him, and this has led to him being broadly supported and criticised online, but it has also led, I believe, to today the BBC apologising for Gary Lineker's comments and also calls for Gary Lineker to be stripped of his role as the face of much of the day. What's interesting, I think, about Gary Lineker's comments is the way that The Sun reported them. The Sun reported the whole incident with the idea of Gary Lineker and migrant kids and put the kids in inverted commas. Now the Sun were being, I think, sarcastic here, suggesting that large numbers of the children given asylum in the UK under this new scheme are not children. But in actual fact, by putting the idea of them being kids in inverted commas, they actually inadvertently open up a much wider debate as to what consists of the naming, or what I will call the tagging of refugees, and how a simple act of tagging refugees these days leads to a determination as to what their actual fate would be. Now, the tagging and naming of refugees has been for quite a while now a significant driver in their fate, and I think one of the most important elements of this is the idea of refugee children. Now, if you study literary theory or sociology, you know that the idea of the child is a construct, that it came about during the 19th century, and that even today it's a highly problematic designation as to when a child becomes an adult. All the same, children seem to be more deserving of our sympathy than adult refugees, and this is perhaps best represented by the visit of Lily Allen to the jungle, I think last week, where she apologised on behalf of Great Britain to the children of the jungle and cried as she observed their terrible fate. This idea of refugee children, of tagging refugees as kids, is actually very significant because it seems to be the only marker that we have at the moment to designate a refugee as somehow truly sympathetic in a post-Brexit Great Britain. I think a lot of this leads back to the Aylan Kurdi incident and the outpouring of emotion that occurred around the Aylan Kurdi incident, which seems a lifetime away now, but was actually only about 18 months ago. The definition of a migrant in terms of are they legitimate or illegitimate, and here in particular the idea that a migrant is legitimate if they're a child, if they're a lone child, buys into a wider trend to label and tag migrants. For example, it used to be the case that you would differentiate between an economic migrant and an asylum seeker. We don't really seem to talk about asylum seekers anymore because we have so many asylum seekers. We need a new system of tagging within the asylum seekers. It's assumed that economic migrants are just not legitimate refugees at all, even though the large majority of all refugees around the world are not really refugees but just economic migrants. Once you've got a designation that you are a refugee, if you like an asylum seeker, but we don't use that term anymore, you've still got to, as I said, subdivide within this vast number of refugees who are the good refugees and who are the bad refugees. The good refugees are given entrance into the UK, the bad refugees are left to moulder in their own filth and mud in Calais or on the border of Macedonia, or left to drown in boats or whatever. So who are the best refugees? Well, first of all, the best refugees in the world today are Syrian refugees. Syrian refugees are absolutely the most benighted, the most horrendously treated refugees in the world, and these are the refugees that we really want to care about and show that we want to extend humanity to them. If you're not from Syria, okay, it's not the end of the road, because you could be from Afghanistan and you could also be from Iraq. These are very good places to be from if you're looking for asylum, but more also in this case if you're looking for sympathy. If, however, you're from West Africa, in contrast, that's bad. It's most likely that you're just an economic migrant, even if you're an economic migrant whose life is under threat due to economic circumstances. Now, we've already seen that not only where you're from, but also what we would call in my field biopolitical issues tie into the tagging of refugees. So one of these markers of your biological deservedness for asylum is gender, and another one is age. For example, male refugees are of late tagged as, first of all, possible terrorists, and second of all, possible pest threats. So if you're a male refugee from Syria, you are less good than if you're a female refugee from Syria, and you're certainly less good than if you're a child from Syria. Now, children are seen as the most worthy of all refugees, irrespective of the totally negligent way that Europe has allowed thousands to be trafficked, imprisoned, left hungry, traumatized, and so on, distributed across Europe, which have thousands and thousands and thousands of abandoned children. Now, we feel bad about these children, but we don't do much about them until they arrive at the jungle, and then we agree to allow a small amount of them to enter the country. So it appears that there is a sliding scale of refugee goodness, and when you reach a certain level, even Lily Allen or Gary Lineker get involved in the discussion. Now, the government thought that they had cracked this when they had given a portrait of what would be the perfect refugee to allow them to get some refugees into the country to diffuse the anger in this country amongst left-leaning individuals, of which there's still a lot, about the Remain camp, Brexit, and the way we treat refugees, but at the same time not alienate the Brexiteers, as we should call them. So here's the perfect refugee for a government. Well, here he is. He's a lone child. This child is from a war-torn state, preferably Syria. This child is located on our borders in Calais, so it's an actual problem for us. We may have already secretly or unofficially agreed to take so many of those children in anyway. This should be a child who's treated badly by the French, because in a post-Brexit xenophobic atmosphere, that's a good thing to talk about in the press. And finally, which a celebrity has anointed with her apologetic tears. So the children of the jungle seem to be the absolute perfect refugee for the government to get involved in. When the whole nation discovered that even the good refugee is not always as good as she seems, this appears to be a great kick in the teeth, even perhaps more of an offence than if the refugee had not been a child and had not seemed to be deserving. Now, the tagging of people, good refugee, bad refugee, economic migrant, asylum seeker, and in particular here, children, lone children, clearly determines who the refugees are within the wider constructions of existence in the world today. So those held in a camp, for example, the jungle camp, they lack legal status, they've given up their citizenship or have it forcibly removed from them, and very many of them barely hang on to their human rights. The treatment of the refugees in Calais is a crime. But what the philosopher Giorgio Agamben calls in his work Homo sacer. Homo sacer is a term for humans that have been stripped back down to the animal level of pure animal survival, so that all their rights taken away except the right to survive. So the tagging of them in this case, the way that they're described, is enough to remove from them their human status and place them in this semi-animalistic state. Now, it's not just the naming of refugees that's an important part of this process. The very activity of marking refugees has been a significant pastime of late, because politicians have come to realise, and states have come to realise, how you tag a refugee gives you permission to how you behave towards a refugee. 18 months or so ago, Cameron famously called the refugees as a mass a swarm, seemingly dehumanising them in preparation for the Brexit vote. He was widely criticised for this, not least because almost immediately afterwards we had the imagery of Aylan Kurdi on a beach, and this dramatically suddenly humanised refugees, particularly refugee children, because Aylan resembled so much our own children, and it was such a dramatic and affecting image that was shared around the world. Around about this time, I think it was Denmark who demanded that to enter into the country, refugees had to make their material goods available, and they were widely condemned for this because it was very, very similar to the treatment of the Jews during Nazi Germany. Again, the tagging of the refugee as Judaic or Judaic designator is an important part there. Now, certain agencies around about the same time or just after in the UK were making refugees wear red wristbands to have access to food. They were also painting their doors red and various other modes of marking out refugees as different from us. And again, they were widely criticised for doing this. Now, the headline in The Sun just encapsulates the ambiguity of this post-Brexit UK in which we live, in that they want to show that they care about kids even if Europe is not telling them to by law. So we want to show to the world that we still will look after refugee children even without Europe bossing us about it. Yet at the same time we are really struggling with knowing if being a child, being a kid, is anything other than a mask or a disguise that individuals are wearing simply to cheat the system. And cheating the system is something that post-Brexit Britain is absolutely against. So it would seem that being a suffering kid in the jungle is still not quite enough for this post-Brexit UK to feel comfortable about opening their borders to a very, very small number of refugees. So even if that is not the perfect refugee, the lone child suffering on our shores, been anointed by refugees' tears, if that's not enough to be the perfect refugee, what is the perfect refugee? Well, I think we have the name of the perfect refugee, and his name is Aylan Kurdi. Why was Aylan Kurdi such a perfect refugee? Well, he was very small, and so you were absolutely certain he was a child. He was located on a beach far away, so although you could be upset about it, you weren't actually really forced to deal with that, because you can say that's Greece's problem or Turkey's problem. And best of all, and I'm not being facetious here, he was dead. We can mourn Aylan, we can feel shocked about Aylan, and we can complain about being powerless to act and deal with Aylan, and never ever think that he tried to cheat us or take advantage of us or show that we were weak. And therefore I suppose culture of fair play and hospitality remains intact. So Aylan Kurdi seems to be the only refugee that the whole of the UK feels confident enough that they would allow into the country. This, I think, is something that is truly a dramatic state of affairs, and that places the whole nation at the moment in a state of profound shame.